All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a tour through the fascinating and, frankly, kind of invisible psychological house of Generation X. We're going to explore the architecture of a mindset that has completely shaped the modern world, yet somehow it just manages to fly entirely under the radar.
Think about it for a second. We talk endlessly about boomers, right? We analyze millennials constantly. And we dissect Gen Z like there's some fascinating new species we just discovered. But standing right at the front door of our metaphorical house is this entirely overlooked group. You know them. They're the older coworkers who literally never complain, the parents who sometimes seem just a bit detached, and the people who actually built the internet but just don't feel the need to post photos of their breakfast on it. They are the structural beams holding the whole house together. So, Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, they are the ultimate bridge generation. They're standing there with one foot in the old analog world and one foot in the new digital world. But the truly defining feature of this group, it's that they expect absolutely nothing in return for keeping things running. And to understand why they operate this way, we really have to look at the unique environment that forged their minds.
Section 1, the empty house effect. Let's see how this builds directly from their childhood, opening the front door to find nobody home.
7 million. Yeah, you heard that right. By 1984, approximately 7 million kids between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. They were the first generation of latchkey kids on a massive scale. Both parents were working, and remember, this is crucial. There were no smartphones. There were no doorbell cameras to check if they made it inside safely, just an empty house and a physical key on a shoelace around their neck.
Now, this massive lack of supervision created what psychologists call a high-contingency environment. Basically, in this setting, your actions and the outcomes, they're directly linked. There is zero buffer. If you stepped out of line, well, you paid for it immediately. And there was absolutely nobody there to sit down and talk about your feelings. You just had to learn to predict consequences in real time, often thinking 3 steps ahead just to survive a normal Tuesday afternoon.
Just think of the modern kitchen compared to a 1970s kitchen. Today, we've got smart sensors that shut off the heat if something is left unattended, right? Gen X grew up with the hot stove analogy. If you touch the hot stove, you got burned, period. That raw introduction to reality taught them very, very early on that you can't always count on a safety net or a parent or some fancy sensor being there to catch you. Section 2, armor and closed curtains. Next, let's walk over to the home security system of the Gen X brain, their emotional armor.
Psychologists actually have a term for this outlook, defensive pessimism. But to Gen X, honestly, it's just being realistic. They were told by society to work hard and follow the rules. But they grew up watching those exact rules change right in front of them. So they developed this mindset of hoping for the best, but fundamentally expecting the rug to be pulled out from under them at any given moment.
Let's dive into this analogy a bit. They built up this psychological armor because of what they witnessed firsthand. They watched their parents' generation go through skyrocketing divorce rates. They saw loyal, lifelong employees suddenly get handed corporate pink slips during massive layoffs. They learned pretty quickly that security is just an illusion. So you always carry an umbrella on a sunny day, and you always hide an extra house key in the bushes.
Now, what's really interesting here is how witnessing those systemic failures completely shaped their view of the workplace and society. They grew up during Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair, the fumbled AIDS crisis. And this made them inherently distrustful of authority figures and fancy titles. In the Gen X worldview, respect isn't just handed to you because it says VP on your door. No way. Respect is demanded through actual, proven competence. If you have the skills, they'll follow you. If you don't, they have zero patience for you. So how does this defensive, armored mindset play out today? Well, it directly impacts how they use the internet, turning them into the literal ghosts of social media. They're deep observers, but they rarely post. And why is that? Well, it comes right back to how they view the safety of their own personal space. They essentially treat their digital life like a living room with the curtains drawn completely tight. They grew up in an era where mistakes were private. If you did something terribly embarrassing, it happened in a basement, not on a viral video. They learned that the fewer people who know about you, the safer you are. To Gen X, being visible almost always equals being vulnerable. So they rely entirely on self-validation, completely immune to needing the likes of random strangers on the internet. Section 3, the bilingual tech brain. Let's move into the home office of the Gen X psyche and explore their totally unique relationship with work and technology.
So the crucial point here is that this generation, especially the Xennials born between 76 and 85, developed incredibly high brain plasticity. Their work ethic was forged in an entirely analog childhood. 5 a.m. paper routes, rotary phones, actually calculating change in their heads when the cash registers broke. Information had a physical cost back then. It meant spending actual hours in a library. But then they reached adulthood right as the world went entirely digital, meaning they had to master complex software and instant Google searches totally on the fly.
This makes them truly bilingual in tech and in life. Think of it as the dual cassette Bluetooth analogy. They know exactly how to drive a manual transmission while flawlessly navigating a modern GPS. They can build complex digital algorithms, for sure, but they still retain the physical capability to sit down and have a face-to-face conversation without nervously checking a screen every 3 minutes.
And how does this translate to their careers today? Well, because they saw companies fail their parents, they just don't give blind loyalty to a corporation. Instead, they're fiercely loyal to their own competence. Their entire career strategy is basically to be the most valuable, highly skilled person in the room. That way, when the inevitable layoffs happen, they are the absolute last ones standing. Section 4. The cost of self-reliance. Finally, let's head out to the solitary garage to understand the heaviest burden this generation carries. Okay, let's dive into this process. This is what we might call the junk drawer mentality. When Gen X encounters a problem, say flipping a bike upside down to fix a broken chain, they'll dig right through their mental junk drawer and spend hours figuring it out completely alone. Research actually shows they report way lower levels of seeking social support during stress. And why? Because to them, asking for help literally feels like admitting defeat. Their incredible capability in a crisis actually stems from this deeply anxious, exhausting unwillingness to depend on anyone else.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive tension it creates when they raise their own kids. It's the ultimate parenting paradox. They will bend over backwards to give the next generation the attention and supervision that they never had. But internally, they're constantly worrying that by doing so, they're making their kids too soft or too visible. They secretly fear they're destroying the very grit and self-reliance that made them strong in the first place.
And that really brings us to the core truth of the latchkey architect. Generation X is the absolute last generation that truly understands how to just be alone with their thoughts. They know how to be bored. They know how to solve a problem without asking an algorithm for the answer. They are that quiet bridge holding the modern world together, doing all the heavy lifting and genuinely not caring if anyone notices or gives them a round of applause. So take a moment to really think about that. Because understanding this hidden architecture explains the very foundation of the modern workplace and the modern family. But it also leaves us with a critical, kind of scary question to ponder. What happens to a world obsessed with attention, visibility, and algorithms when the invisible